Zach, what up, man? How are you?
Good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, man. You're down there in Arizona, you just said?
Yeah, things are literally just starting to heat up here in Arizona. We're getting ready for the summer, and yeah, it's a fun area to train and hang out. We get used to the heat and do what we can.
So, Zach, you and I are just polar opposites, homie. I haven't gone for a run. It's been a bit. It's been a bit, you know? Um, and so, yeah, and then never, if I never go for a run again in my life, I'll be totally stoked. But it does always intrigue me, right? Like I wish I was a runner in some ways. So you're an ultra runner, yes, and you do all kinds of ultra races. And how did you get here? What is the story? Because the gospel fire, it's about doing hard stuff, and ultra running and marathon running, and it's definitely fucking hard. So how do we get here?
Yeah. How does one find themselves in a
Yes,
situation where they're running
yes,
100 miles? Yeah, that's a very
yes,
good question.
yes.
I will quick rewind too and just say that totally cool that you're not a runner or have no anticipation of doing it. I like you am interested in folks on the opposite end of the spectrum of me. I find that just such a cool thing to look into the world that you're so disconnected from like where I'm physically capable of doing type of thing. In fact, my podcast, I used to co-host with a guy who was on the exact opposite end of the spectrum. He's like literally twice as big as I am.
Yeah.
and so it's a cool way to look at things. So we'll have fun, I'm sure.
Here, let's stay on this topic for a sec. I think it's super important, actually. Like I love to talk to people who do just total opposites in so many ways. Like people ask me, my grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and the number, like, the question you ask somebody, who's the number one person you want to talk to, like alive or dead? For me, so for me, it's Hitler.
Yeah.
I want to talk to the guy, like, and I don't want to argue. I mean, afterwards, I might want to beat him with a baseball bat and then stick it up his fucking ass, right? But I want to like just sit down and have a conversation. I want to talk.
Well,
So,
there's this intrigue, at least as far as I can gather, of like when someone is doing something completely different to you, whether it's something totally terrible, like in the example of Hitler, or in our examples of just kind of sport. You want to know what's going through their head. It's like, why is their brain wired so different than mine? Or are they wired the same? And for whatever reason, they caught something at a certain time that drove them in the opposite direction that drove me at, or like, what was that catalyst, that thing that kind of spurred them on towards getting so into whatever it is they fine tuned to find themselves in that position years later.
it's just, yeah, like, and I think we need to be okay with this, right? Like, how much do you weigh?
About 140 pounds.
Yeah, you're not playing in the NFL.
Never was.
Right? Never was. And
learned that lesson my freshman year in high school, by the way.
What's that?
I said I learned that lesson my freshman year in high school, by the way.
Right. Because you made the team or didn't make the team?
I made the team, but I didn't see a lot of playing time, and the big hits I did take were in practice.
Right. And that's super important. Like, that's an important life lesson, that you go, oh shit, okay, I'm 120 pounds. What were you in high school, I guess?
Yeah, probably 120, 130.
120, 130, somewhere in there, right? Let's even say you were 140 pounds. Yeah, football's not my sport, right? Just like ultra running isn't LeBron's sport.
Right.
And he had to learn that his sport was basketball, right? Because different body, different everything. And I think these lessons, and I think we're depriving some people of these lessons right now, of being like, oh, you did a great job. Here's here's a trophy. And it's like, dude, you sucked. Yeah. And that's okay. It's not like, it's not a terrible thing.
Yeah. I think it's, one thing I was really fortunate of, and this kind of gets back to that question you asked about how I got into this, was, when I was a kid, especially at those kind of that formative age, when you're kind of, you're like 10, 11, 12, you're like good enough to start participating in a lot of like physical activities, structured stuff, team stuff. And, my parents were pretty open about what I was doing as long as I was doing something. So I got to try a lot of stuff. So I got a pretty early firsthand look at, this is where I am maybe not as good as my classmates in, and this is where maybe I'm a little better than my classmates in. And I think like really what's sometimes lacking is kids aren't always getting enough experiences, things to actually find the stuff they're good at. So then if they're just met with things where they're constantly getting beat, then, you know, that's also kind of a negative cycle as well. And then you can find yourself in a situation where, well, we have to find a way to give this kid a ribbon so he doesn't feel so defeated that he gives up or she gives up, rather than let's give them as many opportunities as possible so they can find their sweet spot. When they find their sweet spot, then let's celebrate that, because that's something that they can really hang their hat on.
Yeah, man, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with like everything, I think, right there, right? Like by trying to equalize, by trying to make a kid not feel good, you know, not feel good, we equalized outcomes, which is never good, right? And what we need to do is we need to create opportunity for everyone, right? For everyone in the whole world to have opportunity to go out there and be amazing, whether it's at ultra running or whether it's at martial arts, which is mine, you know. And that's the important key, is it's not the outcome that really matters, because kids and you and me, we've always found our way, right? If we had the opportunity, and the opportunity is such a key. So let's get back to your opportunity here. Where did this opportunity start for you?
Yeah, so the first time I even knew that endurance sport was a thing was through the Presidential Physical Fitness Challenge that we would do as elementary school students.
Mm-hmm.
And our Phi Ed class, you know, we would do like the V-sit reach, the shuttle run, the chin-ups, and then the mile run. And I was probably average at best at everything but the mile. So, or maybe a little bit above average in some of the other stuff. But it was pretty clear to me, like, the one that stood out was the mile, and it did for a couple of reasons. One was, you know, some of my classmates who, if we did a 100-meter dash, they'd smoke me. You know, I was beating them by a huge margin in the mile. So I thought that was weird, because in my mind at that time, it's like, well, running's running. If they can run faster than me for 50 meters, then they can run faster than me for an endless number of miles. And like speed was this very like binary thing in my mind, I guess, at that time. And, you know, the other thing I realized is every one of my classmates also was just pretty much done with the mile run after we did it the one time. They're like, I'm not doing that again unless I have to. And I was thinking to myself, man, you know, that was fun. I liked that. That was a cool challenge. I want to do more of it. So like those two things kind of stood out to me. And that was like kind of the first time I probably ever gave a lot of thought into sport or physical activity as being something where you can be good at part of it and not good at other parts of it. It wasn't like if you're good at basketball, you're also good at football, baseball, track. It's like, you know, there, like you said before, LeBron James, possibly one of the best basketball players to ever play the game, would probably not be one of the best ultramarathoners, or if we want to go to more like standard Olympic distance stars, he was never going to win a medal in the Olympics at the 5,000 meters. So
I mean, he's not going to win a medal at the Olympics at any
right. Yeah. So, right. So it is, it gets really interesting, I think, when you start to get past that surface level thought that I think, you know, as kids, we're inherently going to be naive to, because we're just not exposed to necessarily the variety, or if we are, we're not exposed to the thought process about it.
That's super interesting, right? Because I never even thought about it like this, because like the two disciplines, for example, running and swimming, which have these different length of disciplines, where in the other sports like basketball, football, baseball, hockey, all, you know, you're either good at them or not good at them. And in these two sports, swimming and running, there's this distance thing that really matters. So to say you're not a good runner, like, yeah, you're not a good runner compared to Usain Bolt,
right,
in a certain thing. And Usain Bolt is not a good runner compared to you in a certain thing, but it's still running. Mm-hmm. And I never thought about it like that for kids, right? Because you just run.
Yeah, you don't like stretch the basketball court out to be like 10 miles long or anything like that.
Right.
You do stretch out the distance of a race.
Wow, you never made me think about it like that. So how old were you when you said that? The first time you ran a mile and you really liked it?
I think I was in 6th grade, if I remember right. It was a Phi Ed class. It was my 6th grade teacher. So yeah, I think so I guess it would have been probably about 11 or something like that.
And that took you to where? After you run this mile, what did that do for you?
Yeah, so I guess another spot where maybe I was fortunate, just with whether it was just the pressures being put on me as a young person or otherwise, was there was never this expectation from my parents, oh, you're good at this, let's really lean into this at the expense of everything else. It was more like, oh, if you really like the mile run, why don't you do track and field day? Or my family would be on a vacation and my dad would say, I've got this conference, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and there's this, 2-mile or mile and a half cross country race that they do on Wednesday evenings. You want to do it. And there was all these, like we said, opportunities to kind of participate in that, but it was never like this driver of, really go after this, don't bother going out for football anymore. We need to get you to the track and start training year round. So I really took a very slow path into running. After the Presidential Physical Fitness Challenge, I probably didn't run structured in any way until later that spring when track and field day came up. And then I probably, did 3 weeks of practice, did the meet, and was done with it for the rest of the year. In high school,
how old are you?
What's that?
How old are you?
35.
Okay.
Yeah. So this would have been 20 plus years ago.
Yeah. So not quite to the specialization thing like you see now with kids.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. I think I probably just missed that era.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was really interesting. I mean, so much so that I knew by my freshman year in high school that the likelihood of me being a great football player, basketball player was pretty low. And that if I was going to be successful in a sport, it was probably going to be a running sport. But I was still able to be talked into going out for football. And, part of that was just because, in my mind, running really wasn't as structured of a sport. It wasn't like a team sport in the way that you maybe look at some of these other, like, ball and sticks type sports. And, I was a new kid at this. My family had moved after my 8th grade year to a new spot. And I thought, like, well, I want to go out for the football team because that's where most of the kids are going to be and all that stuff. So it wasn't really
the chicks too, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The captain of the cross country team isn't necessarily, getting asked by multiple girls to the prom or anything like that, or homecomings. But yeah, so like, I thought football is going to be fun. Let's try it. I'd never played tackle football before. The school I went to, we did flag football up until 8th grade or until freshman year in high school. So I thought this is going to be something new, something fun to try out. And, being from Wisconsin, it's like almost ingrained of you to be a huge Green Bay Packers fan. So football's always on the back of your mind anyway. And yeah, so I did that and just kind of recognized like where I kind of fit within that world versus some other stuff. And, thankfully, in the spring, I didn't really have a big interest in going out for baseball. Track and field took priority over that in my mind. So I went out for track and recognized pretty quick that, oh yeah, the mile, or I guess the 1600 and the 3200 are events that are going to be things that I could potentially win or potentially compete in. Right. So then when cross country rolled around that next fall, and I had, gotten to know the rest of my class too, outside of just the football team, made some friends with some of the guys and the gals that were on the cross country team. And we're like, oh, okay, let's do this. Let's go for cross country. And then, I had a really good experience my sophomore year in cross country. So then it was basically, ingrained in my mind that cross country and track and field would be the sports I focused on in high school for the most part. And not at the expense of playing other sports, but just like if I'm going to go out for a high school structured program type of thing, those were going to be the ones that I wanted to do.
Question keeps popping in my mind because we do these segues whenever we have meetings for work, and the segue last week in a couple of the meetings was if you could run at 100 miles an hour or fly at 10, what would you choose?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, if I could run 100 miles per hour, I would break a lot of world records. So, I guess it would maybe come down to how quickly or how long I could go for, because if I'm thinking of it just practically too, flying at 10 miles per hour is slow enough where it wouldn't be super practical in the sense that, oh, now I could fly home to the Midwest.
Go to Europe.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But running 100 miles an hour, I'm assuming the police aren't going to pull me over for running. So I could actually get home quicker than driving.
So for me, it's if I could run 100, because I think of it like I could care less. I really could care less most of the time about money. I care way more about time, but money does help with it. So here's my logic. If I could run at 100 miles an hour, that means I could also run at 30 miles an hour or 20 miles an hour, right? So I would break all of the world records. I'd be better than Usain Bolt. And I could also play in the NFL, right? So I'd be so fucking rich.
Yeah.
I'd have so much fucking money. And then I could fly private everywhere. I could own private jets. And then I don't need to fly at 10 because I don't want to fly at 10 because that's slow as hell. Right.
Yeah.
Like I don't think when you like, it's cool to fly for sure, like to have that superpower, but not at 10 miles an hour because you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I guess the only potential counter to that I can think of would be if you can physically pull off the act of flying. Some like a lot
You
of
might be really rich too.
Yeah, someone's gonna some really smart people are gonna take note, and they're gonna build you a suit that, as long as you can get up into the air, that suit will protect you and allow you to go 500 miles per hour. And now we're talking.
Why are you fucking up? Why are you fucking up my shit, man?
I still like your angle better though, where not you could essentially play all those professional sports.
Yeah, you just play all the professional sports. You're just the best at like at all of them at like 2 or 3 major professional sports.
Yeah,
and no one can fuck with you.
Yeah, the flying thing, it's like, what are you going to dominate the wingsuit diving the contest?
Yeah. So, all right, back to you. So high school ends and where you continue running, I assume.
Yeah. So even high school, even when I kind of just started to identify what sports I was definitely going to be best at and the ones I should spend my time in, I didn't like dive into it so specifically that I was like running year round and, not hanging out with my friends and playing pickup basketball and stuff like that. But by the time I even got around to running over the summer was my last year of high school, like leading into that senior year. Okay. So, at the time I look at that, like, I could probably have ran faster times in high school, moved up on the list of like the performance list at the state championships and things like that, had I been a little more in line with some of my counterparts at the time with that. But when I look at myself now and where I am, I'm really happy with that gradual kind of, introduction to the sport too, because there's a lot of other things that come along with that bag of specializing that we kind of talked about a bit when you take things super seriously at a young age. So it really wasn't till I got to college where I, started thinking about running more so than just, okay, I show up for practice, I do what the coach tells me to do, and then I go home, and then on race days I race, and that's that. In college, I got interested in, well, why do we run at this pace at this time? Why do we run this distance? Why do we do these short intervals here and these like lactate threshold or tempo runs here? Why do we do a long run there? And just all the kind of ins and outs, the actual like explanations, the research behind it, the hows and whys of the sport, I started getting really interested in college. So as I kind of like developed as a runner, a year-round runner in my college years, I also developed the knowledge base of the why I'm doing it, which really set me up well, I think, post-college to kind of have a little bit of a baseline knowledge there to build off of as I, eventually got into kind of ultramarathon stuff and the longer things that were a pretty big deviation from the essentially 5K to 10K distances that I'd be competing at in college.
Because, I mean, I think maybe some people know this, but like when you train for an ultra marathon, or even when you train for a marathon, I've heard you never run the actual distance.
Yeah, you don't usually. In marathon, you don't usually run the full distance. Some people will, but it's much less than the people who don't. Like even the pros are oftentimes probably pushing up to maybe 20 to 24 miles, and they're more inclined to do a long-ish run that's going to get like maybe 3/4 to 5/6 of the distance of the race, but do a huge chunk of it at goal marathon pace. So they're kind of really getting close to mimicking race day conditions and race day experience to kind of really know like this is a sustainable pace or not for them.
What happens though? I got a question there though, because what happens, right? I've always wondered this, like, because I coach fighting. Mm-hmm. I had, so my one of my athletes on what's called a deload week. You know, I'm sure you guys do deload weeks, right? Yep. And my other athlete's deload week was last week. So that now we are within, well, she's through this week. So we have 1 day and then 2 more full weeks of training. Right. Mm-hmm. And we are going to mimic in her sparring, right? She spars twice a week. We are going to mimic the fight. Like, I want to see what you have 3 rounds, 1 minute rest, get tired. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, get tired. Now before the deload week, we push the distance longer. Right? We're like, yo, okay, I want to see 6 rounds today. Mm-hmm. We never do like, yo, give me a round.
Yeah. So you're putting her in a position where, you're going above and beyond the physical requirements that are going to be asked of her on fight day so that you really know where the holes are. Am I understanding that right?
Before the deload.
Before the deload, because then you want to step back, let everything catch up and not overtax her so she's kind of hitting that margin of diminishing returns.
Right, because, you know, when we definitely in our sport, we have to play with like when you get tired, you can like make mistakes and the mistakes are costly, right? Of getting concussed or cut or so, you know, we have to play this where I'm sure as you do too in your sport, but there's not another person doing it to you.
Right. Yeah. It's a rock that your head hits on the trail if you trip and fall.
Trip and fall. Right. So, we mimic, right? In MMA, we definitely mimic, and you don't mimic as much. Why? I can understand for the 100, right? Because the 100, I'm sure kills you, but for like an actual marathon, why not mimic ever?
So, I mean, with the marathon, I think they mimic to the degree that they might do, say, a 20-mile run with 16 miles at gold marathon pace. So they're getting awfully close to what they're going to be asked to be doing on race day. And if you do the right training leading in the right workouts, you can kind of extrapolate forward at that point and get a very good look. Like unless there's a mistake made or something unforeseen happens, this is a very tight range of times where this athlete is going to be able to run on race day. And I mean, you do have like the caveats like adrenaline, race day atmosphere that you can't mimic perfectly that could potentially introduce a, you know, I'm sure in your sport, you see this too. You have like game day folks who are like in practice, they're like kind of mediocre and they are there, but for whatever reason, when the lights turn on, the crowd starts roaring and they get in that ring, it's like a whole nother person's there. So that environment they thrive off of. So there's going to be some of that.
How do you know they can mentally handle it though?
I
question,
see.
Right? Like, because I have to see that you can mentally handle 3 rounds, right? Like everyone's good fresh in fighting. Like if fighting was 1 round, it wouldn't be me because I'm not athletic enough or like, you know, but so how do you know that they can mentally at the 20-mile mark when they've been, because that's what you said they practice, right? At gold medal marathon pace. What happens at 23 miles?
It's a good question. I think that's maybe where the sports do differentiate a little bit, where you do kind of have to prove yourself on event day then. So when you get into some of the longer stuff, you're going to have fewer races oftentimes. So there's maybe less exposure points, but you definitely see this in the ultra running community too, where it's, you know, so-and-so hasn't figured out this distance yet. They haven't proven themselves. We suspect they will be able to if they do the right things and solve the problems they've had in a lot of times, but they haven't yet. And then you have these folks who are just very consistent. They've proven themselves multiple times. They've done it year in and year out, and you get they're a lot more predictable. Right. And I think that's kind of what makes the sport exciting, is that there's this like kind of like, there's there's at least a sliver of uncertainty no matter what. And oftentimes there's a big gape of like, you know, there's 10 people on this starting line who could win if things go their way versus someone else's way. Right. One of the best examples of this is probably the Western States 100, which is the most competitive 100-mile race in the United States on the trail side of things. And basically every year there's probably at the very fewest 5 men and 5 women who, if they have their best day, could find themselves winning that race. And there's probably 10 on each side where if something goofy happens, like it's the hottest year on record, or for whatever reason, a bunch of other people make mistakes and they all line up on that one year, this person could win. And that's what makes it exciting, because we just don't know. I mean, most people aren't really stretching out past, say, maybe 100K training race before they're doing a 100-mile race that they're peaking for. They may have done a 100-mile race within like the last few months, but you know, usually once you get inside, like they say, like 3 or so months, you're probably better off picking your A race and focusing on that. And anything you do outside of that should be like at a reduced capacity of what you're capable of from a racing standpoint. And that just offers up, like you said, a lot of uncertainty. You know, 100 miles is a long ways, no matter how fast the course is. So there's a lot of opportunity to make a mistake, to do something you didn't think you could do. It's also a little more nebulous on like what is a sustainable pace. So like you can feel so good at mile 20 of a 100-mile race running 10 to 15 seconds per mile faster than you should, but that's not going to surface until mile 60, mile 70. So in the moment, you don't know. So a lot of it just comes with experience. I think it's one of the reasons why it's fairly rare that we see someone come out and run their best 100-miler in their first attempt or their first couple attempts. Usually it's, even the most consistent people in the sport, they're seeing incremental progress over the years. And we're seeing a lot of people have success at 100-mile distances after they've been doing it for a few years and they've had the opportunity to really observe what other people are doing, see what works for them, what doesn't work for them. So I guess long story short is we're leaning on quite a bit fewer experiences to base our decision making off of. So there's a much smaller data pool to kind of like base a decision off of. Just makes it a little less strict scientific and a little more kind of anecdotal and a little bit more individual at the point of kind of knowing what's going to work for you versus somebody else. And fueling is another big part of this equation too. When you're running 100 miles, you're going to be eating and drinking things along the way. And, one person may be able to essentially eat the entire time and not have stomach issues. Another person might, if they hit a certain threshold, find themselves in a situation where they're wasting more time by having their nutrition come back up than they're gaining by eating it. So there's a lot of kind of things to like variables to kind of play around with, but it's what makes the sport exciting. And I think it's what draws people to it too. So you don't get too many complaints.
Why in the fucking world do you want to run 100 miles?
So when I was a sophomore in college and talking to my cross country coach, and he was breaking down just the trajectory of kind of like the training systems that I would go through throughout the course of a collegiate career, he got to the end of it and he was telling me about how the juniors and seniors are maybe hitting 90, sometimes even 100 miles a week in training in the summer. And I remember at that time thinking, there's no way I'm ever going to run a 90-mile week. That'd be silly. I mean, I just ran the math in my head. I was thinking if I take a day off, because at that point in my life, I was thinking, well, I need at least one day off per week. I was thinking that's 15 miles a day, like every day. And at that point in time, I think the longest I had run in a single day was right around that. So I'm like, there's no way I'm doing that 6 days in a row. But, you get into the sport, you end up actually running those 100-mile weeks a couple of years later. Then you find yourself in a situation where, like I was, where I actually start to enjoy the long run during the week as my favorite workout of the week. You start to get curious. You start to wonder, well, what if I push this needle a little further? You jump in an ultramarathon. A lot of people will jump in like a 50K or a 50 mile is kind of their first one. And it's kind of just like, sometimes it's like, hey, I'm just gonna see what this is like, what, no harm, no loss. If I hate it, I never have to do it again. But I'm definitely going to learn something about myself by doing this. And then they do it. And they find out that even if they had a really, really tough go of it, those days afterwards, they find themselves wondering like, oh, if I would have done that differently, maybe you get curious. So I think it attracts these curious minded people and these people who are like a little bit more thirsty for the unknown, so to speak. And then the next thing in your mind is like, well, if I made it 50 miles, I wonder if I can make it 100K. I made it 100K. I wonder if I can make it
double. That's double, man. I've never done I doubled 1 mile to 2 miles, but I didn't go 2 to 4. I went 2 to 3.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, you got to think like these people running 100 miles are probably thinking the same thing about your sport. They're like,
right.
If I went in a ring with another person who, with the right technique and the right timing, could literally put me in the hospital, like I'm not even thinking about 10 seconds. So like you get them in there for 10 seconds, you think they're thinking about 5 minutes after that? Definitely not. Like, right. Especially if they
I get it. No, I mean, like that's the thing with these ultra sports, right? These ultra intense sports is it takes a different mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for example, for us, like, man, don't ever say we play like that. That is like that's a big thing for us. This is the only sport you don't play because the hospital is really likely afterwards, like a life-changing moment. So right. Don't put play in front of what we do.
And if you're on the right end of that punch too, there's consequences there as well. Like, I mean, I guess if you absolutely hate the person you're up against, like, maybe in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I'd like to put this guy in the hospital, but I don't think anyone's there thinking like, I want to end this person's life or,
do you watch the UFC?
Yeah. Okay. So maybe there's some of that.
No. I'm asking, do you watch it?
Do I, probably just enough to be dangerous.
Okay. So you saw it during the quarantine here, right? During the pandemic, where there was no crowd. When one fighter knocked the other fighter out, there was very little celebration. Mm-hmm. They would like, oh shit, right? And they'd
Yeah.
go over and make sure the person was okay. It was very little celebration when a knockout happened, because the crowd is what like energized, like, oh shit, I fucking like, you know,
Yeah.
like, so yeah, you saw without that, people like would win and be like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you're right. It's
Yeah.
very little like I want to hurt this person.
That's something that I think is maybe at least somewhat unique to your sport is like, I mean, you hear about in other sports too, where this person can just flip a switch, right? Where they can go from being this kind of like calm, like low intensity type person, but then, you know, the ball gets tipped and all of a sudden they're like, just,
Here we go.
yeah, they're on. It's like, you know, nothing's getting in their way. But with fighting, I think it's like, you know, that could be your friend. And a lot of times it probably is at least someone, you know, your acquaintance with, and maybe are very friendly with on the other side. So you almost have to, in order to like put yourself in a position to be able to do what you need to do to win that match. You're right. It can't be play at that point. You have to flip a switch, because if it's just play, then you're never going to do what you got to do to win. And they're going to do that to you, perhaps.
Yeah, for sure. Without a doubt. I want to go back to you, because it's your podcast, not mine, but yeah.
You'll be getting an invite from my podcast then soon.
So my question is you said something there, like you learn about yourself, right? What is it that you learn about yourself in these races?
Yeah. I think, I mean, there's what you learn about yourself, I think, throughout the process. And then there's what you learn on the race itself. So I think if I look at it holistically through my career, one thing that I've really learned about myself is that the mental side of the sport is very unique, because it is physically demanding, but the physical intensity at any given moment is really low compared to what you could do. Like, I've won races before at an average slower pace than I ran my first mile in. So like, really at any one moment, if I'm in a headspace of like, I literally physically can't go any faster, that's almost certainly just as much, if not more, mental than it is actually physical. So you find yourself from time to time running a race where things just go well. You find yourself in a position where, for whatever reason, when you hit low points, which are inevitable, you pushed through them, made the right decisions, you regained your focus and just kind of like pushed through, and then ended up having one of the best races you've ever had.
How do you do that? Like, what is that like, right? Because I believe sport is a microcosm of life, you know? So like when you're in this low point, and first describe the low point. What is the low point like in 100-mile-an-hour race?
So
100-mile race.
So there's the physical and mental component to it. There's the mental component is you just get bombarded with these negative feedback loops where it's like, why am I here? I've got too much further to go. There's no way I can sustain the pace I want to sustain. You know, so-and-so's passing me. I'm falling back. You know, all these things start piling up, and they tend to cascade quickly. So you let a couple of them creep in at the wrong time, and then it starts kind of spiraling. So you got to learn how to navigate that, or learn how to like redirect that. And the physical,
how do you redirect?
You get experience knowing that, like, for one, it's not linear. Like, if things are going badly, it's very easy to think, well, if it's this bad now, in 10 miles, it's just gonna be that much worse and that much worse. And if you're already at rock bottom in your mind, you think to yourself, well, I just can't tolerate anymore. So how could I get worse? And then if you drop out, then it's like you eliminated your chance to ever see. So you have these experiences where you do push through that, and you kind of say, okay, I'm getting negative now. I need to be positive. I look back, I did the training required to run this pace for this distance. I've done this. I know I can do it. Am I ready to give up on 99% of the work? Because when you think about it, if I spend 6 months preparing for a race and I'm 60 miles into a 100-mile race, it may feel like I've got 60 miles in my legs and 40 miles is a long ways to go, and I don't know if I can do it. But if I look at it grand scheme of things, in a 6-month buildup, 40 miles left of a 100-mile race is 99% of the way there. So I have to be able to convince myself that it's worth bailing out on 99% complete rate. Like, imagine if you were playing a video game and you're 99% of the way to finishing the game. You're like, screw it, I'm just going to stop now. And like, you'd think about that. Like, even if you didn't care about video. Yeah. Even if you hate video games, you'd think about that. You're like, why did I quit on 1%? So I think, and people who've been in the sport long enough, they've had situations where they do pull the plug in those situations. And then you have situations where you are in a similar spot and you push through, and then maybe you have another one and push through again, and another one and push through again. And then you remember some of those ones you did in the past. You're like, wow, I pulled the plug really early that day. That's embarrassing. Like that, I let myself down. I quit on myself. I quit on the people who spent their time and energy to come out there and help me that day. I quit on the race director who let me in this race, hoping I would run a great day, have a great race, great time. It would, put a spotlight on their event and hopefully increase their registrations the next year. When you start thinking of it like that, it just becomes, I think, a little easier to really put yourself in a position of I can't do this anymore, where it's actual like, okay, I have something that could potentially be a long-term injury if I keep doing this, or, all my goals are off the table at this point because I've made enough mistakes. It's clear that my training philosophy did not pan out for this particular event. I'm gonna cut my losses. And, the sport's gotten big enough now too, where there's legitimate professionals in the sport where their livelihood depends upon race results and things like that. So, there are situations where it does behoove a runner to say, this is just not my day to day. I took a risk early on, it didn't pay out, and now I'm, cascading towards the back of the pack. And, if I stop now, I can show up to another race in 6 weeks and potentially like salvage this buildup or this season. So, I mean, there's always exceptions to everything, but generally speaking, I think that's kind of the mindset. And I think when ultra runners really sit down and are honest with themselves, they can identify points like that where, they had a race where they pulled the plug earlier than they should have. And that, I think, is a negative in the time, and it can be a negative in your mind in the sense that you don't necessarily want to do it again, but it can also be a positive if you look at it as a learning lesson and know like, okay, now I know when I feel like that, unless there's something structurally wrong or a really, really bigger, unique situation to stop, then I need to really ask myself if I'm willing to quit on myself versus, kind of saying like, I didn't have it today, or, something like that. So, some of this just comes through trial and error, personal experience. Yeah. And it's a pretty open community too. A lot of people are willing to share these things. It's one thing I've tried to do a lot of, since I've, found, even a handful of people who cared to follow what I was doing is try to be as open as I can and honest as I can about some of these things, because in my mind, it's like someone's going to be listening and they're going to learn from that mistake I made and not make it themselves. And, if I can be a part of that person finding their peak performance or their peak, accomplishment or something like that without having to kind of make the mistakes I made or what other people have made, then I think that's kind of a cool way to give back too.
Amazing. Yeah, no, for sure. As we start to wrap up, I do want to talk about one thing here. You're about to do this race, in September, I think you said, right? What is it? Because it's not like an official race, right? So let's talk about it. What do you have going on coming up?
Yeah. And this actually kind of highlights what we've talked about a little bit here too, is like, well, why? You get to these points where I think like once you enter, there's like this big leap to enter the ultramarathon running community in terms of deciding to do one. Once you decide to do one, everyone's going to welcome you in. It's a very welcoming community. But like there's that big leap of getting in. But once you get your feet in the water, it's like, I want to get to the deep end now. I want to get to that 100-mile run. So people are like kind of drawn into that. But, for me and a lot of runners too, you eventually find events that you're better at and events that you really enjoy. So you tend to kind of build your seasons and build your efforts towards those. So you lose a little bit of that kind of unknown where I've never done this before. Like there's this unique feeling of I'm standing on this starting line right now and I'm about to run further than I've ever run before. Whether it goes good or bad, I'm going to travel further by foot than I ever have before. And that's just a kind of a cool feeling. And I haven't had a whole lot of those experiences recently just because, I ran my first 100-mile race in 2012. That distance has been one I've really focused on for the last, 8-9 years.
And you've been a world record holder in it, yes?
For sure. Yeah. So I've definitely fine-tuned a lot of aspects to that, which I really enjoy, but it comes at the expense of kind of trying different things, new things. So when I first got into ultra running, I kind of heard about this route that is called a Transcon or a Transamerica. There's different ways you can do like a southern route or a northern route, and there's different iterations of it, but there's kind of one standard that's used for like record setting purposes, where you start in San Francisco at City Hall and you essentially go kind of across the middle of the country till you get to City Hall in New York. And it's a roughly 3,000-mile journey. The current record is by a guy named Pete Kostelnick. Couldn't be a nicer guy, but absolute savage in these long stage type things. He averaged over 72 miles a day and finished in 6 weeks, 6 hours and 30 minutes. And it's just
He ran
mind-boggling.
72 miles a day every day for 6 weeks.
And that was with a day off. He actually got a little dinged up around the first week and had to take a complete rest day to kind of let it settle down, and then got back out and kept going. So he was probably actually averaging more like 74 to 75 when he was actually out there running.
Holy fuck.
And yeah, he's just like, he's the man when it comes to this type of stuff.
How long does it take to run that many miles?
He was probably running for somewhere between like 13 to 15 hours a day or something like that would be my guess if you looked at it.
And then what do you do? Do you eat and then sleep?
I talked to him about this. He said he was basically, I think the way he described it is you keep the kitchen open 24 hours a day. And, he said he'd wake up in the middle of the night, and if he woke up even for a couple of minutes, he'd grab like a protein bar or something like that and just eat it. And when he was running, he's always eating something. And then he's eating big meals when he isn't running, which are very small windows of time. But I think he estimated he was eating around 15,000 calories a day or something like that. So,
and how about like recovery? As far as like, I mean, do you ice bath during this time? Like
yeah, the hard part is there's not a lot of opportunity. Yeah, the logistics of something like this, even if you throw a lot of money at it, you're basically still living out of an RV. So, you can stop at hotels occasionally as well, which I think would be a good spot to maybe mix in an ice bath or something like that during something like this. But it is very much an injury prevention thing, right? Like you're running really slow, you're walking and running, like you're just basically trying to move as often as you can without sacrificing so much sleep that it ends up deteriorating you, or without going, Pete kind of made this mistake, which is why he took the day off. He pushed it maybe a little too hard in the early stages and aggravated a tendon. But there is a unique thing about it too, where there's another guy, Dean Karnassus, who's done both west to east and east to west. And he actually had it set up in a way where I believe it was Colorado State University did some blood testing on him along the way. And they just looked at some different blood markers that were looking at just kind of like muscle breakdown and recovery. And what they noticed there is there's like about a week where you kind of cascade down to rock bottom from a physical standpoint. And then it hits there, and it's almost like the body just says like, okay, this is the reality, and then starts kind of like adapting, and like he actually started kind of improving then after that. So you kind of have to like be in the mindset of this is going to get really bad in a very short period of time. But once I hit that spot, it's going to start to gradually improve, and then I'll hit a rhythm and some consistency. So, but yeah, so like this route has been something I've been interested in for quite a while, but it was kind of always this distant kind of dream type of like, I'll do it someday, but I just never ever put a date on the calendar or anything. So it was never really that real in my mind until I met this guy, Justin Wren, who is a humanitarian, mixed martial artist. He's fought for
Justin and I are homies.
Oh, are you? Okay, awesome.
Homies.
Yeah. So you know his story and everything.
Yeah,
and
of course.
When I heard his story, I was like, okay, that's the external motivation that I've been looking for to do this type of a project now versus like, waiting another 5 years or just punting it down the road. When I heard his story, I was just like, man, if I could get a hold of Justin and see if he'd want to partner up for this and just do a big fundraiser, an awareness thing for Fight for the Forgotten, I think I've made enough connections in the sport and outside of the sport through my own personal efforts that I think I could get enough attention on this thing to really, bring some eyeballs onto his cause and help him out. Because when you hear Justin's story, it's just like, he's such a giving person, and he's got every excuse in the world not to be, but he is. He's maybe the most giving person I've ever met. And then like, I was talking to him the other day. I'm just like, sometimes I'm like baffled that you're like 2 years younger than I am. Like you feel like this kind of like, well, he is big, but like this big kind of like wise, like overseeing person who's, made more like intellectual leaps in his mind or done the right thing for the right reason much earlier than I would have probably in my life. And I think that's just super motivating to me, and I want to help out. The icing on the cake was I went with him to this fundraiser in Oklahoma City, where this high school put on this big week-long fundraising thing. They do it every year, actually. It's like this really big thing. And they actually have there's a contest for your charity to get selected. And Fight for the Forgotten got selected, and Justin asked me to come out and do some guest speaking. During that couple days I was there, he had like, I think there was 2 kids who turned in their suicide letters. Like they literally said, I have this letter that I wrote that I was going to leave my parents before I, ended it all. And they gave it to him, said, I'm not going to do it because of you. And I'm just thinking, man, this, and when I saw Justin take it, I mean, he's like he knows how to behave around a situation like that, because he's seen it so many times. I mean, he was in it.
Right.
Then I talked to him afterwards, and I'm just like, what is that like getting that letter? And he's like, dude, it happens all the time. Like you'd be surprised how many times I get these things sent. Like we've got like piles of them. And I'm just thinking about that, like how cool that is, that he's dedicated his life, and even at times at the expense of his own personal endeavors. I mean, he's clearly like
without a doubt at the expense of his own personal endeavors.
Right. Like if he had decided like, I'm going to be just as selfish as I can and get to be as good at mixed martial arts as I could possibly get, I mean, who knows where he would be right now. Instead, he's dealt with bouts of malaria and some things that are like semi-undiagnosed.
Personal depressions and anxieties and addictions.
Exactly.
Right? Like, I mean, marriage recently, and a lot of it comes down to that like his personality of I'm doing more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for him, it's kind of an opposite battle than it is, I think, for a lot of us, where for him, he has to actually be a little more selfish,
right? Because
if he's not going to be here for very long.
Right.
And then he's forfeiting like 30, 40 years of what he could potentially do if he like maybe pulls back 10% to take care of himself. And it's just a unique person to meet. It's a person you meet maybe once in your life. It's very rare that you run into a guy like Justin Wren. So for me, it was like, this is definitely the cause. This is definitely the person I want to get behind. I want to spend a lot of time and energy for it. And I mean, ultramarathoning is, I've got a lot of emails from people saying, hey, I heard you on Joe Rogan. I saw your race and this, and it motivated me to kind of get into running. And I lost a bunch of weight. I like turned my life around from a fitness standpoint, a health standpoint, things like, and those are incredibly motivating and exciting to see. I'd rather see those things come in on a regular basis than, go and break more records, to be honest with you. But, it's a very small way to give back compared to what Justin's done. And then also the amount of like kind of selfishness that also is required to do ultra marathons on a regular basis. I mean, I'm fortunate that my wife is an ultra marathoner too, so we can give to one another when one is racing and the other is not. But in a lot of cases, like, you're asking people to help you out, give up their weekend, their time, spend money sometimes and things like that to help you, to center their things around you so that you can cross that finish line, when in reality, it's a group of people who've crossed that finish line. You do enough of that, and I think it opens you up a little more to want to seek out these type of situations where like, how can I give back and what can I do to kind of give back? So I'm very motivated to kind of do a lot of kind of promotional stuff in the months leading into this effort to kind of get the word out about Justin, about Fight for the Forgotten, and hopefully get a lot of eyeballs on his charity and some donations on his charity through the process of running from San Francisco to New York. So that's what I've got on the calendar for the year, which is a big deviation of what I've done normally. I'm what you would call a single day ultra marathoner, where the races I do are typically finished within a 24-hour period. So, that's, I'm going to be doing just basically a string of single day ultra marathons. I will go to bed at night, and that piece of the puzzle I think is going to favor me well. But, it's a little different in the sense that I can't destroy myself any one day to the point where I'm sitting on the couch the whole next day like I would normally after a 100-miler. I've got to be able to get up and do it again and again and again. So
for 6 weeks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's if things go very well.
Right. So now my 2 closing questions that I always ask, and I think I kind of know the answer, but like, look, dude, you've been on Joe Rogan, right? Like, why the fuck do you come on this podcast? Because like this, like you could just call Rogan, right? Because he loves Justin Wren too, and he'd like, why? Like, and then you have 10 million eyeballs on it. Why? Yeah.
One thing is, I think when I first got into ultra running, one thing I learned early, I was a school teacher when I started. So I was working a full-time job, And I'd get up early in the morning. I'd run for a couple hours. I'd go to work. Sometimes I'd run again after. Sometimes I'd coach, then run. So there was a lot of just like train, work, eat, sleep, repeat type of a lifestyle. So after a while, I got into listening to podcasts while I'd run in the morning. Cause I'm like, well, if I'm going to be out here for 2 hours versus bettering myself in some other way, I may as well learn something. So I started listening to podcasts that had topics that were interesting to me. After a while, I, won a few races and got asked to go on podcasts. And I really realized that this was the form that I loved to do versus like, spending a bunch of time on some of the other social media, which are a little more kind of short form type exposure points. So I've just always really loved it. I started my own podcast.
But you could probably get on anybody's podcast after you've got on Rogan's.
Yeah, but I think one of the reasons I got on Rogan's is because I paid my dues on a lot of the other podcasts too. Like, you're open to going on. I mean, Joe is, I'll get at, obviously I've been on Rogan twice. So it's not uncommon that someone asks like, hey, can you give me a contact to Joe Rogan? I want to get on Joe Rogan. And it's like, I could go to Joe and say, hey, you should have so-and-so on, but that probably seals their fate to not get on. Yeah. Because Joe loves Joe's the only one who knows for sure, but I get the sense that Joe really likes the process that kind of got him started, where he gets really interested in a specific topic, or he comes across a person for one way or the other that is doing something in a way that is intriguing to him, and he wants to know more about it. And, for him, especially with his podcast where it is now, he can have that person come on and talk to them. So when someone reaches out to him or someone tells him that they should have so-and-so on, it's not that channel, that authentic channel that I think delivers us those 3-hour conversations that we've grown to like know and love about Rogan, that makes him so unique and makes him one of the top podcasters in the world. So I think he recognized that the authenticity of his shows are oftentimes because of the way he finds his guests versus, just trying to like have find the perfect person for the perfect topic type of a thing.
I agree.
So, it doesn't escape me that like, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to get invited on his show in the first place. And that there's really no necessarily like right to that. And, like I love being on podcasts. I love talking to other people. And I think especially during the COVID stuff, when you're more or less locked down, it's like, it's a great way to chat with people who maybe only here I am talking to you, Elliot. And like, when else would we have ever like bumped into one another?
It wouldn't have happened.
Right. Exactly. So you just never know. And sometimes I've had myself enough times saying like, yeah, I'll do that podcast. And then thinking like, as it gets closer, like, maybe I should have said, no, I've got this going on or this busy thing. And then I go through the podcast. And I'm like, that was a great conversation. That's, and then I'm buzzing the rest of the day.
This was the podcast today, because like I thought, I don't know how it showed up like this on my calendar, but I looked at my calendar and I thought I was a guest on your podcast.
Oh, I probably screwed that up. I probably signed up with my podcast.
Yeah, all good. So I was like ready to like, okay, I don't have to do much. I just have to answer questions. Right. Yeah. Like, but that's easier sometimes than being the podcast host. Like,
yep.
On this end, I have to pay attention to what the fuck you're saying.
Yeah.
And I was literally going to be like, God damn, I am not ready for this right now. Maybe
there's gotta be an excuse, right?
Maybe, yeah. No, I was like, maybe I'm just going to ask him to reschedule. And then I was like, no, Elliot, don't. And like, we had a great conversation and I really enjoyed it. So like what, to the point you're making, like, yeah, like I like just talking to someone's really cool.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, there's times where I get really busy and I have to say no, or I have to say like, let's do this, but it's going to maybe be a little while type of a thing. But, but yeah, I mean, it's a fun form for me. I get a lot out of it. I think personally, for the reasons we just chatted about. And it's, I also recognize as a podcast host too, I've had guests come on my podcast who have no reason to come on my podcast because they have, 500,000 Instagram followers. They could just go on Instagram live and reach way more people than coming and talking to me. So, but they say, yeah, let's do this. I mean, here's an example. I did this treadmill challenge last year around this time. And one of the ways I wanted to make it interactive is I wanted to bring in a bunch of guest speakers while I was doing, because it's how boring it is to watch someone run on a treadmill for 100 miles. And, I sent Bert Kreischer a note. And Bert Kreischer is like one of the hottest guys in comedy right now, in the sense that he's probably getting asked every day to do something. He's over like somewhere filming a movie at the moment. And I just sent him a note and said, hey, Bert, I'm doing this treadmill thing and I'm bringing on guest speakers.
Had you met him before? Or is this
I had met him before. So we had a connection. But again, like his needle doesn't even budge coming on my treadmill live stream, not budge. So like, I'm thinking like, okay, if I'm super lucky, Bert will be super nice and say, I'll come on and crack jokes for 5-10 minutes, but then I got to roll. He comes on for like almost an hour and a half, just gets in this detailed conversation with one of my hosts. And then we bring in some of these, like I actually had a really cool setup at the end. I had some of the top female ultra runners in the world come on and chat, and Bert stuck around. He wanted to talk to him, and they were talking about getting him into some 100-mile race and things like that. And he just had a good time and hung around for a while. And
fuck yeah, man.
Yeah. So it's like, when I think about stuff like that, it's like, well, if Bert Kreischer can take an hour and a half out of his day when there's a million other things he could do that would actually make him money and, you know, like promote his career, he's going to do that for me, then like, who am I to say no to, you know, someone's podcast who's trying to kind of just, you know, who's legitimately trying to do something productive, right? Like, people aren't recording podcasts oftentimes, especially the small ones, because they're looking to make bank on it. Like a lot of times it's
Spotify's about to call.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the small ones though, it's like a lot of times it's a labor of love. It's a passion. It's an interest. They, you know, they're generally interested in talking to me. So it's like, it's fun to talk to people like that. And, you know, as long as that stays true, I think I'll probably keep saying yes.
Keep doing it. Yeah. All right. Last question. I believe everyone has a superpower, something that makes them amazing in the world. Doesn't necessarily make them rich or famous or anything like that. What do you think your power is?
That's a good question. If I had to pick one on the spot, I'd probably say positivity. I think that's a huge driver. I think, you know, negativity is what ends careers in ultramarathoning. Negativity is what makes life more miserable than it needs to be.
Sure.
Granted, I've had a lot of opportunities and have been incredibly fortunate in a lot of cases. So perhaps it's easier for me to stay positive than some folks, but it's something that I oftentimes really lean on heavily when I'm asking myself why, and when I'm asking myself, you know, what is going on here. And it's a reoccurring theme, I think, that I've seen pop up in my own life. And it's something that I know I can count on when the going gets tough.
Fuck yeah. All right, man. Well, tell everyone where they can follow this journey of your race, where they can help out Ren's foundation. I can put all that in the show notes too. So yeah, where they can hit up you, plug away.
Yeah. So my kind of central channel is my website, which is zachbitter.com, ZACHBITTER.com. There you can link to my social media channels and my podcast and all that stuff. I'm most active on Instagram, which is just @ZachBitter. For Justin Wren and Fight for the Forgotten, you can go to fightfortheforgotten.org. We are currently getting kind of a unique page set up that's going to be kind of specific to the Transcon project. So if you're looking to say, I really want to support this organization and I want to do it through Zach's effort for that, stay tuned for that. That'll probably be a landing page on their website for that, as well as probably a link from my website in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah. All right, guys, as always, don't go out in the world and try to be Zach, and don't go out in the world and try to be me. Go out there and you find your power.